Hi everyone, it's Josh with Talk About Trek, and today we're going to be talking about Star Trek The Next Generation number 19, Perchance to Dream, the new novel by Howard Weinstein. And Howard Weinstein is an excellent Trek writer, and this is an excellent Trek book. Now, one thing I did different today is, with this book, usually I read the back cover. I didn't do that. I went in completely and 100% blind. And it was a great idea because there was a plot twist about halfway through this that if I had read the back cover, I would have been expecting. But I had no idea, so it was a little bit extra fun. So let's read that back cover together. On a routine mission to survey Damaris 4, a Class M world with no intelligent life, a USS Enterprise shuttle crewed by Data, Troy, and Wesley Crusher is captured by a race called the Tanarans, who claim the world for themselves. As Captain Picard tries to negotiate with the captain of the Tanaran ship, the shuttle suddenly disappears in a blaze of color and light. Picard demands to know what happened to the shuttle and its crew, but the Tanarans deny any part in their disappearance. Suddenly, Captain Picard vanishes from the bridge and finds himself alone on the planet's surface with the Tanaran captain. As the two captains begin to work together, they realize that they are not alone on Damaris 4, as they confront an incredible alien force with the power to destroy a world or transform it? What? See, if I had read that, I would have been expecting that. And I didn't read it, so I wasn't. And I think going forward, I'm going to continue to not read the backs. Because just going in blind and not knowing those little extra details can lead to, some fun little twists for you. So this book was published December of 1991. And, let's just jump right into it. The Enterprise is returning from, or is in the midst of a medical mission, and they have left Data, Troy, Wesley, and two young cadets to do like a survey mission on this planet, and they are on their way to pick them up. On the planet, they are finishing up the mission, packing up all their stuff, and getting ready to go. Nothing too out of the ordinary to report. They get into the shuttle and take off, and as they get up into the atmosphere, they are caught into it by a tractor beam from an unknown ship. And this ship is large. They describe it as being about the size of the Enterprise, but looks old and worn and just kind of looks like it's been places. So they're caught in this tractor beam. The Enterprise does come up at that time and is attempting to communicate with them, and that's when you get to meet these characters. So this ship is called the Glyn Kale, captained by Captain Arrett of the Tanaran Echelon. And the Tanaran Echelon is now claiming Damaris 4 as its own, and demands that the Enterprise leave immediately or they will be destroyed. Well, at that time, the shuttle, which is actually under a bit of distress, this tractor beam's intensity is pretty strong, so it is beginning to kind of break up. The shuttle is covered with this kind of weird colored shimmering light from the planet, and then is just gone, transported out of there somewhere. Nobody knows where. Of course, the Enterprise thinks that they did something, but they claim that they didn't do anything. They send an away team down to the planet to look around for things. Riker and Geordi don't see anything, and it's at that time that the Captain Picard and Captain Arrett are both enveloped in this same light, and then they disappear. So they end up on the surface of the planet, where Picard gets to play a little bit of Survivor Man and gets a chance to do some spear fishing, which is kind of cool. You get an interesting little scene there down on the planet where Picard, having successfully caught some fish, the Frenchman in him comes out, and he's cooking the fish over his open fire, and he's found some fruit, and he's squeezing some juice on the fish, and just doing his best to make a delicious little meal out there in the middle of the woods. So this time they reveal that the shuttlecraft was transported basically inside the planet somewhere into this cave. The young cadets in there are Gina and Ken, who are new characters that they brought in just for this story. Now, this story initially, reading in this wonderful book, was written as a script that he had sent in. The script was rejected, so then he rewrote it into a novel. But they made it for an interesting idea for a episode, I thought. And one thing that he mentioned in that book was that script writers were told to come up with new and interesting pairings that maybe they hadn't seen before, which was why he chose to have this Data and Troy kind of leading this field trip kind of thing with the younger people. So But that part of the story really is not the most intriguing part for me. For me, it was the plight of these Tanarans. So at this point in the story, they don't really reveal much about what's going on with them, just that they do appear very desperate. And, they start out as the enemy. So back on the planet, you have Captain Eric and Captain Picard, and she's completely distrustful. She doesn't want to talk to him or accept any help from him. But being hungry enough, she does accept the offer after finally enough cajoling to take a fish. So she does have a fish with him, so it's kind of the first steps towards, maybe making a peace and figuring something out here. In the cave, they do begin exploring, trying to find a way out, but basically it appears that every way they go is a dead end. They have a little B story down there where they're trying to figure out, maybe does Ken like Gina, does Gina like Ken, does Wesley like Gina, is Ken mad that Gina maybe likes Wes? But none of that really matters, but it is all well written enough that it's fun. So this book takes so many little kind of like side stories where you take half a chapter and you're just kind of talking about Picard's feelings about home after, specifically after the episode Family. So like they kind of divulge a little bit into that. And he's just such a good writer that it kind of takes away from the story, but it doesn't bother you that it's doing that. And it's really nice. So Picard, after eating his nice fish, Eric's kind of retreated off into the woods, is laying down. He's thinking about his childhood, thinking about, again, another time where they kind of just retreat into the mind and they kind of talk about, give you a little bit of backstory, which is great. But all of a sudden, an earthquake, and Picard is caught like right in the middle of it, and basically is in like a sinkhole, and you can feel himself sinking lower and lower, and he's doing his best to climb out, but to no avail. Luckily, he hears Eric calling his name, reaches up, and is able to grab onto a stick that she's extended, and she pulls him out and saves his life. So, at that point, they are transported again after that happens. But this is when the big reveal comes. So after that, after she pulls him out, they kind of go to a whole different... Oh, like I said, this is when they reveal that there are other creatures or other life forms on the planet. And I like the way that they did the way that they talked. So as you can see when this comes into focus here, that here we are, the aliens there, who are Mog and Co., the way that they wrote their dialogue was like in bold, which made it think like it kind of made it pop out as like a whole different method of communication. And basically, Co and Mog, they're what they call themselves shapers, and they're like the life forms that are on that planet. Mog believes that the crew of the Enterprise is not sentient life, and so that it should be destroyed so they can continue on with their work of shaping the planet and trying to make it into whatever more perfect place they want it to be. Co disagrees. Co believes that they are sentient life. And what's really interesting about these shapers, too, is that they have their kind of own ideology, too, and they believe that their planet is all that there is of life. They don't believe that there's anything beyond that. But perhaps this Co does. And that's why she's kind of intrigued and curious and trying to find a way to communicate and see if the crew of the Enterprise is indeed sentient life. So it's just an interesting look to how different a life form could look upon us, and just because we're so different from them, we're not sentient. So Co is taking it upon herself to kind of figure that out. It's at this time that they do transport Picard and Eric back to the Glenn-Kale, where there's been a bit of an emergency, which I think is why that they were sent back up there. So they never kind of explain the comings and goings and why people were sent from one place to another, but it all kind of comes together in the end, and basically it's because they're sent where they need to be. So there's trouble on the Glenn-Kale. The magnetic seals that kind of keep everything under control in the reactor room are failing. They've got maybe 30 to 60 minutes left, and they are done. Picard, in his first visit to this ship, notices just exactly in what bad state it is. Everything is worn and broken, kind of patched together, held together with anything, basically. People huddled on the halls, huddled on the floor. So he gets an idea of exactly what kind of dire straits that they are in there. Picard convinces them to accept help. And they are so against it. You can tell something happened to these people because they are really against accepting help from anybody, and they've got to do it themselves. But they realize that there's nothing they can do. They've got 60 minutes at the most, and they've got to get some help. So They do send Geordi and a crack team of engineers from the Enterprise down to the Glencale's engine room to get to work and see what they can do to at least keep it from blowing up in the meantime. And they are successful, and they're able to... and this is kind of the first real step, too, then the Tenarians are able to see that, yeah, we can accept help, and it is okay, but they're still really, really unsure about it. They still wish, now even with the trouble gone, they still wish to settle on the planet. But now the issue is Picard and crew need to determine basically what do the life forms mean, and they also still need to find the shuttlecraft. And the shuttlecraft is kind of doing its own, the shuttlecraft crew is kind of doing its own thing down there in the cave. And again, it doesn't pertain to this part of the story so much. And this is, I think, the really interesting part of this is the Tenarians and all that. But let's see. Back in the cave, we will actually go back to we will go down to the cave. So back in the cave, all right, so we've got things kind of managed up here on the ships. So here's what's going on. The ship is in terrible condition. They really couldn't make it to another planet probably, so they decide they do need to occupy this planet. Picard and crew are trying to be like, well, somebody is here. They're trying to figure out a way, how can we communicate with this life that's here so that we can successfully transplant you guys here, you know? So that is the idea. And they send Geordi, it's his mission to figure out, scan the planet, figure out a way to communicate some way to do something. In the meantime, back down in the cave, you get all sorts of shenanigans where these young teenagers are kind of running off and doing different things they shouldn't be doing. Troy is there, but really she doesn't seem to do much in this book at all. She has a couple of lines, but for being featured on the cover, not so much. I mean, the cover really should have been Captain Picard and maybe this Captain Eric. That would have been cool. But anyway, in the cave, Ken ends up going off and getting himself lost. Gina ends up going off and finding him. And then Data, who noticed them both missing, goes off to find them as well. And is at that point in the cave, they see these shapers shaping the inside of the cave. And they describe basically they come up to this big waterfall. And then this massive chromatic light comes up and just whooshes up. Basically blinds them, changes everything, and completely changes the whole inside of the cave. And then they say, oh, that's nice, and then they walk back to the shuttlecraft. Back in the shuttlecraft area, things are actually starting to happen. So this is like the main portion of the cavern. More and more of these glowing lights are starting to appear, and they form this kind of glowing, convalescing thing. And Data says, well, it doesn't look too bad. So he decides he's going to try to walk into it. So he walks right into it. Everything moves away from him except for one of the lights. And of course, that is Ko. And Ko has realized that Data is somewhat different. And maybe through him, she can figure out some way to establish communication and determine if these beings are sentient life or not. Mog, who's the other one there, is still determined that no, they're not, and basically says, you don't have any time left. We're going to go ahead and wipe them out. So Ko decides what he's going to do, or she's going to do, is merge with Data. So she goes basically right inside of his head, and then they describe it as kind of Data's almost like Data's transcending time and space, and he's flying through space and seeing all sorts of things, but it's just a process of this life form merging with him. At this time, the creatures go up to the ship and they beam Picard back down into the cave so that he can be kind of present when Data comes out of it. And Data comes out of it, and at first they think that he's not working at all. All of his functions have ceased, but he slowly kind of lights back up, sits back up, and is able to tell them kind of what happened. But he's not even able to describe because it's kind of overwhelmed his sensibility. But through the merging, it's been made so that Ko has learned to communicate with them, which he does. So that's when they kind of go through the whole thing, and Ko thanks them for, basically showing them that they're not the only form of life in the world. And gives the offer of allowing the Tenarians to settle on the planet. But the Tanarans aren't sure if they want to settle on a planet with other people, so they have to have like a council and figure it all out. The deal with these people, though, is, and this is isolating. I think one of the funnest things about this book was their story and kind of everything that went along with them. So their story was they came from a planet which initially was very small land masses. So they had initially a very small population. But even over time, they could not stop like climate change and just all the bad things that were affecting their planet. But they did have time to leave. So they evacuated their planet, and I think the number was something like 10 million evacuees in these ships. And they were offered help from like a neighboring world, people that they traded with before. They had a world in their system which was habitable but needed work. And they offered it to them in exchange, just like they would come in and work it, and then they could have the world because it was bad. Turns out these people were very, very bad, and they didn't want colonizers or terraformers for the world. What they wanted was slaves. And they basically enslaved this entire race and killed most of this race. And the very last surviving members of this race are all aboard the Glencail, which is why they are so distrusting of anyone, because the last time that they trusted anyone, they basically lost their entire society. I mean, it was nearly a complete genocide. They number 5,000 on the Glencail. So the ruling council of the Glencail, they get together, they have a little meeting. Captain Eric gives a nice speech kind of saying, we definitely need to make this move, we need to start trusting people. And in the end, they do decide that they are going to live on the planet together with the Shapers, and they are also indeed applying for Federation membership with the Shapers. So, yeah, that was cool. So, man, I'm leaving out so much that actually did happen in this book. But like I was saying, it's one of those books where you've got this story kind of going along, and then you just get these well-written little reprieves throughout, and there's just so many of them. There was a very interesting one where Data, I think it was maybe just a few chapters of Data contemplating like death and how that would be for him. Lots of wonderful little scenes here with Picard and Captain Eric, and even the stuff in the cave with the kids. It was well done and well written, and it was fun. And not as many laughs in Perchance the Dream as I had in Q and Law last week, but still, this is an excellent novel. I had a lot of fun with it, and I was so drawn into it that I was able to finish it up in just 3 nights. So read Perchance to Dream by Howard Weinstein and enjoy it like I did, because and don't read the back. Don't read the back. Just go into it blind, and you'll enjoy it. I hope. But anyway, I've just told you the whole story, so forget that and then go read it again. Read it again in like a year after you've forgotten this. So, but so we're at number 19 done, and I just feel I have to plow right along directly to number 20. Which is a pretty wild-looking one. Have a look at this. Spartacus. So, again, we're not going to read the back. We're going to jump into it completely blind. But it looks like we've got maybe a Riker and Data story and a Gladiator. So, that'll be coming up next, and we'll see about that. Once we finish that, we'll probably move on to something new for a little bit, just to switch things up. But who knows? We'll see from there. As always, everybody, thank you so much for watching. Live long and prosper, and we'll see you next time. Bye.